welcome to today's MEF Connects Digital webinar. The title of today's session is New Thinking on Telco Data and Mobile Advertising, and I have three excellent guests to help me navigate this intriguing topic. First of all, I'd like to briefly say a few words about the MEF. We're a global trade body established in 2000 with over 150 members worldwide, and we act as an impartial and authoritative champion for companies across the mobile ecosystem. We provide our members with a platform for networking, collaboration and advancing industry solutions, and we have a particular focus on issues affecting consumer trust, privacy and security, which is another good reason for looking more closely at today's topic. Okay, so on with the discussion. Today we have guests from two companies, zeotap and Cinarra, and they're both at the forefront of the movement to bring telcos and other data custodians into the mobile advertising space. So our panelists are from zeotap, Florian, wave, Florian, if you can hear me. Can you wave? Yes, there he is. And we also have Oliver, his colleague, who is, I should say, Florian is SVP of Global Telecom Partnerships at zeotap. And Oliver with the scarf is SVP of Marketing at EMEA for zeotap. And from Cinarra, on the other side of the Atlantic, we have Bill Leece. He's the Vice President of Product Management. He's joining us from Silicon Valley, so give us a wave. Well, thank you. Okay, so let's kick off. We'll set the context for this first. Now, advertising is clearly going digital, and digital is going mobile, and I think everybody in the audience knows this, so we don't need to expand on that too much more. But the kind of result of this is that advertising is going programmatic, not just in mobile, but also on TV and radio, etc. So maybe we can start with the zeotap guys first. Perhaps you can briefly explain, what programmatic means in terms of the way advertising is presented to consumers and how its impact is different across different regions. Maybe Oliver, you'd be a good person to start off.
Sure, absolutely. I'd love that. So first off, if we look back at the history of advertising, then advertising has always been different from what advertisers would have loved it to be. And that is in a way that, when a big brand thinks about who they want to be reaching with their ads, right, they have a clear customer in mind, right? For the last decades, before programmatic was invented, there was a disconnect between that idea that the brand had, so their customers, and how they could reach them. So advertising had to be contextual. You had to choose which TV station do you want to advertise in and hope that you're reaching the right people in that environment. Programmatic has entirely changed that landscape. And what I always like to say is that the advertising market is probably the first one that has actually come up with a framework, technological framework for the real-time activation of big data. And in that, it makes it special because what programmatic allows advertisers and publishers to do is to trade impressions on an individual level in real time and connect data to that so that on an individual level, you can choose which impressions you want to bid what amount of money on, right, in order to reach the right people. So specifically, if L'Oreal wants to reach women and they have the right data to do that, right, on an impression level, they can say, oh, I know this is a woman. I'm willing to spend more on that impression because that's exactly the kind of people I want to reach.
Right. So broadly, previously, they would have to go to the media outlet that they felt matched the profile that they were trying to reach. And now they can look for the individual anywhere, really. And they need obviously data in order to target and track that individual customer. So I suppose just to follow up on that, what's been the progression of programmatic across different regions? I mean, I think in the UK and the US, it's very well progressed. In other markets, perhaps less so. Could you just expand on that a little?
Absolutely agreed. So as a general trend, globally, programmatic is developing very quickly. The UK and US, like you said, and other tier one markets like Germany, France, right? They are to a majority programmatic already. And then what we are seeing is that obviously the developing countries in the ad space, right, like India, like Spain, like Italy, that are technologically a little bit behind, right? On the other hand, usually have a very strong mobile footprint. So there's a lot more mobile and digital usage. In India, for instance, people are using their mobile phones 24 times more than desktop and 7 times more than TV. So you can imagine that even if they are starting at a lower base and they have to catch up a little bit technology-wise, they are doing that very, very quickly, because digital is just so much more important, and specifically mobile, than in the other geos.
So the progression of the mobile advertising market has seen, as everybody knows, Facebook and Google utterly dominate it. Perhaps Bill, we could bring you in here. To what extent is do Facebook and Google dominate the market, and why? What's the reasons behind that dominance?
Sure. I think in the latest stats that have come out in the US, Facebook and Google are getting, I believe, 58% or somewhere of the digital advertising budgets in the US. Obviously, the reason that Facebook is so dominant is they have the eyeballs, they have the engagement, and they're sort of, you can call that closed, walled garden. So everything is possible within Facebook, reaching consumers there, spend a lot of time. Google owns so many components of the ecosystem, be it ad exchanges, publisher sites, phone operating systems, so that makes them a very formidable competitor. Where mobile operators have an opportunity to play in this space, of course, is when you think about it, they're the ones who provided the pipes, if you will, for Google and Facebook to make money on mobile, but they haven't been participating in any of the upside. But nevertheless, mobile operators are sitting on extremely valuable consumer data, and with the right technology and approach, they can use that data and monetize that data in the advertising ecosystem in a way that can be very competitive with both Google and Facebook.
So let's drill down into exactly the kinds of data we're talking about here. So if you can elaborate a little bit more on, so clearly Google and Facebook have the eyeballs, but they don't just have the eyeballs, they have the means to target customers more effectively. Perhaps you can let us know what kind of data they have that others lack, and how operators can offer an alternative.
Sure. Again, I think Google is the great example, because they own so many parts of the ecosystem. They have control of, it depends on the market, but let's say roughly half in developed markets, maybe a little bit less than half the operating systems. In developing markets, they own the vast majority of the operating systems on the mobile phones. So they're able to stitch together data about consumer interests with, be it search, website visits. So they're able to put together a pretty compelling story on consumer intent. Where mobile operators have an interesting opportunity to play, of course, is that many mobile operators have some very important data assets. Particularly, one that we're focused on is streaming real-time location data. So with the real-time location data feed, you can build or infer consumer interest not based on, say, the kind of websites people are visiting, but actually on the kind of places they visit. Additionally, operators have very high-quality first-party demographic data, because in the developed world, at least, when you sign a contract with an operator, you disclose things like your birthday and your gender. So that's very valuable to advertisers. Another sort of technical artifact of working with operators is that it's actually possible to stitch together the various online advertising identifiers that exist in the advertising ecosystem. So, for example, on my phone, if I'm using a browser and I'm using an app, to most advertising systems, I look like two completely separate people, because I have two different advertising identifiers. But with carrier data, you can unify those into a device identifier, and then take this fragmented user behavior set and build it into something that is unified. And that's very valuable for advertisers.
So Florian, maybe you could elaborate a little bit from zeotap's point of view. I know you guys have a subtly different approach from Cinarra. So maybe you could tell us about the kind of data sets that you are able to deploy from MNOs.
Absolutely. So I think in general, the domains mentioned by Bill are absolutely what we are also working in. Let's get a bit more in the focus domains, what we are really kind of like believe, or what our company is marketing at the moment in our core geos. So first off, we are talking about social demographic data, and as Bill mentioned, this is highly ID card verified, or at least a very high quota in European markets. We are live today with 8 tier 1 operators, actually most of them in Europe. And this really helps us, obviously, to build a unique proposition. having more than one operator in most markets allows us to build cross-carrier models with penetrations of above 60% of a market. And having for more than 60% of the population ID card verified social demographic data is super unique in the market, to be honest. Nobody else can offer that, and not even Google or Facebook can compete there. So I think Oliver will a bit later elaborate on a few of the case studies we've also done, comparing Google data and Facebook data to zeotap, and this has really shown actually great results. On the other hand side, we're looking at behavioral signals. So for us, behavioral location is one dimension, but what we're also looking at is actually app usage data and browsing data. So operators control the gateway, which is quite unique. You don't have many players in the ecosystem actually being able to do that. So while others obviously only get bits and pieces, operators have the chance to see the entire traffic while the user is on mobile data, obviously. So that's a great opportunity, obviously always based on the necessary permissions by the user or the consent. But in general, that's an opportunity. And the last opportunity is identity. That's what Bill mentioned, from online to online. We expand that a bit. So we are not only collecting or connecting cookies to advertising IDs on the online side, but we're also mapping this to emails and phone numbers, which is actually a great lack, again, in the market today. Companies want to bring their data to the online world. They want to advertise to users in the natural environment of mobile phones and tablets. And to do that is actually making this connection is quite a unique opportunity. Again, deterministically proven through the gateway. Again, super unique.
So let's try and make this real for the viewers. So let's say I am a publisher and I am looking, an advertiser, and I'm looking to target, let's say, women, mothers between 35 and 45. How would I do that? Let's say I'm not using Facebook, I'm just using a bunch of different inventory. How would I do that without using the kind of data that you're providing, and how would you improve that using your systems?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, what we've done is, in the meantime, while we're waiting for the telcos to gather the consent for that, we have been extremely concentrated on what the market needs and wants, right? Because it helps making us successful if we can deliver what the market truly needs. So in 2016, and specifically last year, after we had brought quite a few operators already on board, the rest joined this year after GDPR was clear, right? What we said is, what the market needs is not just the socio-demo data and telco-specific data attributes, but there are also some things that the telcos cannot right now at this point deliver at scale. So what we've done is, based on the reputation we built with the telcos, which are obviously very focused on GDPR and data security, we were able to win a lot of other exclusive enterprise data partners that are right now complementing our data set, so that whatever data buyer, agency, or big brand comes to us, if they have a specific briefing, we can mix the telco data together with our other partners' data, and then basically that enables us to become a preferred data provider as a whole for the agency, not just for one specific niche data. Yeah. The niche itself is super important, right? Socio-demo is a huge need. It helps large advertisers specifically transfer TV budgets into the digital environment, right? Because video is a very big topic. Within mobile, again, video is the strongest growing one. But it's super helpful to be able to combine these different data assets and offer them out of one hand.
So I want to come back to the other data sets that you're looking at later, but would it be possible to just look at the hypothetical example of trying to target, let's say, women between 35 and 45?
Absolutely.
I'd like to, you could draw a contrast between the kind of probabilistic data you would have used at the moment and how you might use your data to make a better targeting.
Sure. So the magic actually lies in the fact that, obviously, based on the telco data, which is super high quality, for any other kind of data, we have assumed a very clear and strict auditing methodology in order to get that on board. Because, again, there are a lot of data providers out there with different backgrounds, most of which are using probabilistic modeling. And the data buyers have told us that that data is not working for them. And the simple reason is that once programmatic came around, there was no data on the market. So everyone that had a little bit of data built a business around that. And it took the agencies and buyers 2 years to figure out that that data is not good, right? which is why we are focused also in the other data categories on mostly raw or very granular deterministic signals, so that we don't have to essentially model. We have a modeling capability. We used it in other use cases. We have a data science team, the head of which came over from IBM Watson. So we're very competent in that area. But essentially, what we said from the very beginning is that if you look at data and AI, AI is essentially an algorithm, a calculation. It will become a commodity. You can already see this with the fund that Elon Musk put up and so on. The true differentiator in the age of big data and AI is the input you have, the quality of the data, because shit in, shit out, and gold in, gold out. And that's the approach we've taken, so that in your specific case, we have raw in-app usage data. So which apps do people have installed on their phone? Which ones are they using? And we also have purchase intent data from large e-commerce marketplaces. And from that, we can deterministically say who is a mother or not, right? And then we mix that up with the telco data.
Right. Okay. And Bill, I'd like to ask you to perform a similar analysis with the location side of things. I know
Sure.
that's something Cinarra is very close to. So maybe you could just talk about how advertisers would have gone around targeting consumers by location, how they would do that traditionally, and how they could do that using your systems, and why that's better.
Sure. So traditional methods of location-based advertising were primarily focused on current location, real-time location, if you will. Whereas in our system, if we want to do the new mothers example, because we have the first-party demographic data, we don't have to build a probabilistic model to determine that this is, I think in your example, a 35 to 40-year-old woman. Additionally, the current location of the user is, of course, interesting to know, but what's more interesting is the historic behaviors. So new mothers might have certain behaviors that are distinct from the normal population of 35 to 40-year-old women. They might spend time, for example, at parks during working hours. They might not every 5 days a week during the work week be going to an office. Perhaps they're staying at home for the first year with their child. So these kind of location behaviors, we're able to do analysis on that with machine learning actually, and marry that with the online behaviors in terms of the type of websites people visit, the type of apps they use. And we're able to create these online and offline audiences by merging this data, and of course intersecting that with the demographic data to say with a high degree of confidence that this is actually a new mother. So we're able to take that data, ingest it, and then we can target appropriate advertisements for that group, for that audience.
So you're obviously combining what you believe are superior data sets, but also the actual location tracking itself, I think you've argued, is superior. So GPS maybe inside of some kind of app would have been used traditionally, and you're using Wi-Fi or 3G. And I think you can get closer. Can you explain a bit more on that?
Sure, we're using 4G and Wi-Fi. So with 4G, you get reach, but you get in the area of 500-meter precision. With Wi-Fi, you can get extreme precision, let's say. So with Wi-Fi data, and I think it's important to note that the markets we're active in Asia are very dense urban environments, public transportation, lots of foot traffic. And the carriers there have made investments in Wi-Fi to offload traffic from their base stations. So in Japan in particular, the country is just covered with carrier Wi-Fi. So what Wi-Fi allows us to do is actually do venue visit analysis. So with GPS, it works great outdoors. As soon as you go indoors, start to have problems. In urban core of cities like Tokyo and Osaka, you also have a lot of high-rise buildings, which interfere with GPS signals. And also, it would be impossible to determine, let's say, a venue visit on the 3rd floor of a mall, which might be a restaurant of a particular type, versus the 5th floor of the same shopping mall, which could be a store where they sell strollers for new mothers. So by analyzing that kind of data with the precision that we get through Wi-Fi, and then with the general behaviors that we can see, in terms of visits to large areas like parks, which we're able to process through 4G, we're able to build a pretty compelling behavioral profile for consumers.
And clearly, you know, when you have this level of location accuracy, you can not only serve ads to people when they're out and about, but you can also presumably come up with new benefits to advertisers, such as you show them an ad digitally, and then you know where they are, whether that's had any impact in the real world. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit about some of the experience you've had of this kind of online to offline.
Absolutely.
Know-how.
Sure. So I think the ad serving use case is sort of the first use case that all operators are thinking about. But over time, it's also, there's a very compelling story around measurement, audience measurement. So given the fact that we're able to deterministically link online identifiers together with the device, and we're able to measure specific venue visits, we're then able to measure people who've been exposed to an ad and if they've actually showed up in a venue. And then we can compare audiences. We can compare an audience, let's say it's a new mother's audience who was exposed to an ad, measure their visit rate to venues, and compare that with new mothers who've not been exposed to an ad, compare with their venue visit rate, and then we provide a venue visit lift function. So that's also still kind of 1.1 thinking about advertising. It goes a little bit further too. With this carrier data, you can also provide advertiser website analytics. So to give you a very concrete example, auto manufacturers, they have had no idea how many people are visiting their car lots. They have no idea how many people are visiting their car lots after first visiting their website. They have no idea which pages on their websites might be driving most traffic to car lots. With carrier data, that's all possible. We're able to provide these kind of insights to these entities.
So Florian, have you got any other similar kind of new models that you can talk about?
Absolutely. So as we are not as much focused on location, we still obviously drive similar use cases. So to make an example, we do a lot of audience discovery and insights analysis. So this means while advertisers obviously not in all cases have a very clear picture of whom they want to target, you can also run audience discovery projects, which mean before actually running targeting campaigns with us, they will actually use our analytics solution to pixelify or kind of like use an actually analytics tool to understand who's the most engaged audience in their campaigns, and then subsequently actually create the right targeting segment so that they can reach them. That's a very, let's say, easy example, but this obviously goes much beyond. You can connect that obviously with the offline to online connection. So this means companies sit on actually quite a big chunk of data and they want to connect that to our data, and they want to overlay it with actually audience insights or understanding of the people who have visited their websites. And this then obviously makes a perfect use case. And you can transfer that actually out of the immediate programmatic advertising use cases, because you can even actually steer and influence website visits, for example. You can determine who actually gets shown which offer, who gets shown which products. And these kind of, let's say, real-time use cases, which are based on carrier data, without actually making the carriers being part of the real-time equation, is quite powerful. And obviously yields
Tim, I think there's some other really interesting use cases as well. We've been pretty focused on ad targeting and measurement, but with carrier data, there's also some very interesting implications for fraud detection, advertising fraud detection, in particular. So, why does fraud exist in advertising ecosystems? Why is it there in the first place? Behind all ad fraud is actually a publisher. Publishers have incentives to provide incorrect data to advertisers to maximize their revenues. So I'll give you an example. CPMs in San Francisco are going to be a lot higher than in Kansas, or to do a European example, CPMs in London are going to be much higher than Ipswich. So if I'm an app developer and I'm selling my retail space in my app, I have an incentive to say that my users are in Manhattan and San Francisco, when in fact, many of them are not. Similarly, a 40 to 45-year-old woman is going to have a higher propensity to spend than a 20 to 25-year-old man. So as an app developer, I have an incentive actually to not tell the truth. So with carrier data, actually, because carriers have no incentive to lie. In fact, carriers have every incentive in the world to be providing high quality location and demographic data. We can actually detect these kind of frauds. So it turns out that ad fraud, is the second largest source of illegal or illicit income in the world after drugs. So there's huge opportunities here for mobile operators to use their data to provide true data sets for advertisers and help clean up this dirty ecosystem.
Let me add one quick thing to that, complementing what you said, Bill. So we also see this on the socio-demographic side. So another problem in ad fraud is actually bot traffic. So basically, you all know what bot traffic is, right? And what it basically incurs is that a lot of campaigns don't have the outcomes that are expected, right? So for instance, in video advertising, viewability is super important. So for how long, for how many quarters of the ad video has someone viewed, right? When we apply our telco socio-demo data, viewability not only goes the on-target reach up because the data is very precise, but so does viewability, so more people that actually have seen the ad for longer, because obviously those users have been certified by the telco, right? It's not some kind of bot farm. And yeah, that's another perspective on the whole issue. So there are more than just, it's more than just one application, how telcos can help all advertisers fight that.
One wonders what the publishers think about that. Presumably most publishers are legitimate and would support it, but there must be some publishers who it threatens their ability to defraud the advertisers.
There's a long tail of publishers. I think in the iPhone App Store, there's a couple million different apps. I don't remember the exact number. It might be 6 million or something like that. But the top 300 apps get the vast majority of the usage, perhaps 80+%. So there are a lot of bad players out there, but the well-known ones, of course, are not doing this. But the long tail is very dirty.
I think Bill briefly touched on measurement. I wonder if you guys at zeotap, you could talk a little bit about that. And I think you guys have worked with Nielsen in the past, and maybe you could talk about measurement and what your thinking on that, and any results you've seen that you can share.
Absolutely. So actually, since the very beginning, right, we've been rather the premium player on the block. Obviously, if you work with telcos, you don't want to build a Me-Too solution, but you want to position yourself as a premium player in market. And you can only do that if you are providing the promise, or kind of like fulfilling the promises on the quality side. So what we did is we established from day one very strong quality measurement standards. So we're working with the likes of Comscore, Nielsen, Nielsen Dara, Facebook Atlas, to actually measure quality of data and to ensure ongoing quality levels, actually be it a telco, but also be it other partners. So if you look, for example, at the US, you have the big problem of family plans. And in the beginning, we were very excited about the US opportunity with telecom operators. While still being strong on the social demographic side, we could actually not work with them. We tested their data, and because of the high family plan penetration, the data just didn't score as we hoped it to score. So these kind of, let's say, also learning processes, I guess, helped us to establish a model which now any data actually coming into our platform is being audited, stamped, with a quality seal, and in the end, then you can activate from our platform as a self-service or helped out by one of our sales reps to actually choose the right quality you want. You can buy 70% OTR threshold. You can also buy 80% if you rather want to go more premium. Obviously, the price changes accordingly. But this is really quite unique in the industry. And at the moment, the industry has lived off the promise of, let's say, intransparency. We're trying to change that. And yeah, building on premium pricing, obviously also a premium proposition.
Another thing that we've done is that we have done audits on our data through independent third parties. So one example is Spain. There is an industry body called AIMC. It's basically the media rating council financed by the big agencies, publishers, and brands. And they are supposed to do exactly such projects. And they have actually called up several thousand of our users and ask them, what's your age, what's your gender, what's your registered zip code. And then obviously we could share with all of our buyers this report, which has massively increased the credibility of the data still, right? Because if, let's say, Vodafone says our data is ID card verified, right? That's the one thing. But if then additionally another third party goes and says, yes, this data is absolutely precise, that has massively helped us build even more trust than the telco brand usually brings within the market.
So clearly, all these new data sets, the reason they're so interesting is because they are verifiable and authentic. But obviously, any discussion of data that is traceable and verifiable and unique brings with it the discussion around privacy. So Bill, maybe you can talk a little bit about how Cinarra works to de-identify this data, anonymize it, and reassure customers that their privacy is secure.
Sure. There's a number of things we do. For starters, Cinarra actually has no access to any personally identifiable information. There is a wall between us and the mobile operator. So the way we communicate with the mobile operator is they send us a hash of device ID. So we don't even get the device ID itself. We get a hash of it. Hash is a one-way function, meaning we can never actually reverse that hash and figure out what the actual device ID is. What you can think of is that we then have a consistent identifier to use in our system. We have no idea who that hash is linked to. We don't have any type of thing like a name, an address. And the only type of demographic information that we get with that is age, range, and gender. So we don't know that it's a 37-year-old male. We just know a male between 30 and 35. Similarly, our system is quite unique in that all the data processing and ad matching, if you will, in our system happens in real time, but in the carrier data center. So we're pretty different than other platforms in that regard, in that the default mode of our system is to process all the data in real time in the carrier data center. So there's no data export of what we could consider a consumer primary key. So a lot of carriers like that. Some carriers actually do want to do this export. We do support both models, but our default model is to keep the data processed in the carrier data center. Then on the reporting side, we do a lot of things to make sure that there's no way to de-identify someone. So for our dimensional reporting, so let's say a venue visit demographic report. Different operators have different levels of sensitivity around a topic called K-anonymity. So K-anonymity means how many number of events have to occur before we can report on them, before we call it something more than insignificant. With SoftBank, that number is 10. With other operators, it's different. So what does that mean? That means if we're running a campaign and measuring venue visits, we're going to report as insignificant the number of male 30 to 35-year-old or 35 to 40-year-old visitors until they're at least 10. So all that together, keeping the data in the carrier data center, no export of consumer primary keys, K-anonymity on reporting, and absolutely no access to PII. Plus, of course, we offer permanent opt-out from our system. So we have two opt-out methods. One is consumers can opt out directly through the carrier portal, through the carrier's website, or they can opt out by clicking on our opt-out icon on any ad we serve. And unlike other platforms where opt-out is cookie-based, which means basically it's temporary, if you clear your browser, you're effectively opted in again. Our opt-out is device-based, not only for ad targeting, but even for audience segment building. So if you opt out of our platform and you're visiting wine bars, you're not going to become part of our wine lover segment as you've opted out. So all those together provide a high degree of control to the consumer and an absolute inability for anyone, including us, to uniquely identify an individual.
So Florian, maybe you could tell me how zeotap approaches this issue.
Absolutely. So I guess that's actually one of our favorite topics as we are discussing it up and down, as you can imagine, in Europe every day. So zeotap is a German company. We were founded about 4 years back in Berlin. So we had to deal actually with the German Datenschutz before GDPR was released. As you might know, actually this was even stricter than GDPR. So we weren't really surprised by the newly introduced rules. Still, we actually are in the meantime quite thankful for a harmonized playing field across Europe. Beforehand, we had actually quite expensive lawyers across each market to help us understand local regulations and local requirements. In the meantime, this has actually helped us a lot, and we actually apply the GDPR standards across the world. So whenever we work with partners globally, GDPR is the way to go for us. We believe this is not only a one-time phenomenon, but actually a global trend. You can see this with the recently passed laws in California. You can see it in Brazil. You can see it in India. So this is not only kind of like a local topic anymore. So that said, what do we do? Actually, we already got, let's say, certified for GDPR compliance in late 2016. We got recertified beginning of this year. We are working with external certification bodies for this. Additionally, and this also has been proven by them, we are going a lot further than many other companies. We are, for example, we are implementing enterprise-grade security standards and privacy standards, because obviously we are working with enterprise partners, and telecom operators are most probably against the most conservative ones amongst them. So what do we do? We have acquired around 8 certifications to date, including ISO 27001 for IT security compliance, which includes standards like hashing, includes standards like encryption, which help de-identify the data and make sure the data cannot be actually used to re-identify an individual. We don't touch directly identifiable information. We still believe, and this is actually how GDPR sees it, the moment you're working with identifiers like advertising IDs or cookies, this is always PII. So I guess we take a bit more of a conservative stance there. We consider it PII, so there's no way around it. If you want to use it in the advertising ecosystem and it's being used to re-identify a user to serve an ad campaign, this is PII under European law. So we need to be a bit more strict there even. And this requires us to apply additional safeguards, which we have organizationally implemented and obviously are also requiring our partners to comply with. This means we are working on a pure consent framework. So this means whenever we get data from a partner, it needs to be properly opted in data from our partners. Only then we will work with it. I think this is an important measure, which we believe actually we owe to the users in the sense of trust. I guess for too much or too long of a time, actually, this has been a bit in the shadows. GDPR really helped to set the rules, and we are intending and are doing the most we can actually to follow them. And to really, in the end, inform the users in the best possible way and give them the chance to say yes before actually use the data. Afterwards, obviously, they still have 3 levels of opt-out. They can either do it on their phone, they can disable cookies, they can disable the advertising ID, they can do it with the operator, or they can actually even download our app or go to our privacy portal to opt out with zeotap. So I guess at this front, we have or at least applied whatever we can, we feel. And this has been also certified by different law agencies. And we are feeling quite comfortable about the privacy topic, given the fact that actually, we're doing everything to inform the user and involve them in the process.
So I suppose, Bill, if I could move on and ask you this follow-up question. It's one thing to make the public, try to persuade the public that their information is de-identified and anonymous. But if the end result is that they're seeing ads that appear to be following them around, that seem to know where their location is, and maybe they might find a bit creepy, is it possible that the end result might be huge armies of customers going to your operator websites and opting out and finding ways to opt out of this system, which is admirable, but it's not going to help anybody, because it means that a huge number of customers are going to not be traceable anymore, targetable.
Right.
Over 3 years, we haven't seen that.
Right.
Yeah.
Same here. Actually, we launched opt-in programs together with our operator partners. We had even beforehand run their opt-out portals. So we had quite good transparency on the levels of actually users being afraid of this. This has not been the case. Still, I want to add one more aspect to it. You mentioned anonymization. Data being used for advertising on individual ID level cannot be anonymous. That's almost impossible. De-identification is a mean of actually safeguarding the data, at least under GDPR. Anonymization is very difficult to achieve if you're working on an individual ID level.
Yeah.
This is why we still consider it PII, to be honest.
One more perspective from the market. So, I mean, we are working essentially to 80–90% with by now 50 of the top 100 global brands. And these are equally as much enterprises, and include the telcos, by the way, right, as the telcos. And I mean, these guys have the least of interest of annoying users or following them around. So they themselves are usually proactively taking the safeguards that feeling doesn't incur, because they're quite afraid of it. So practically speaking, one example, the way they do that is to set a frequency cap in the common advertising technologies, which means that they only want to reach a user, for instance, once per week, or 3 times in total, or once in total, depending on the brand. And that is another way that, you know, it is ensured that the users don't feel like they're followed around. Apart from the increasing transparency that brands and telcos are adopting.
Okay.
I think that's a good point. Just to talk about frequency capping, and I'm sure zeotap does this too. But as I was mentioning earlier, when you have different ad identifiers, you look like different people. So if you have other platforms have a frequency cap of 10, but if I have a couple different cookie IDs and my mobile app ID, I might see this, let's say, same ad 30 times. That's not a good user experience. I'm quite sure zeotap is doing this as well with device level frequency capping. That means across your different online identities, we'll make sure that that ad is only served a specific number of times as required by the advertiser. So using carrier data, actually maybe counterintuitively, we're actually able to cut down on the creep factor by unifying these pseudonymous identifiers together.
That's an interesting point. Florian, you guys have talked about bringing other data sets into the equation outside of telco data. Can you just briefly, we don't have a lot of time left, but can you just briefly talk about where they might come from?
Yes. So it's really any big company you can imagine collecting large-scale user information and having a direct relationship to their customers, being able to collect consent from them for different use cases are actually potential partners of ours. It can be down to typical examples are publishers who are either providing interactive or media content to them, who have login information. This means they would also have user profiles connected to the user behavior. It could be digital wallets. It could be companies which are providing free services and actually using the data in, let's say, in a value exchange model, always giving the user still the opportunity, obviously, to opt out. So there are multiple, actually, examples of companies who have successfully started this with us, and in the meantime have created actually a sizable revenue stream out of this business.
Can you give any examples?
Unfortunately, reference case is always very difficult in this domain. Yeah, so I think the examples I mentioned with publishers, media publishers, or for example, the digital wallets is giving you an idea.
And Bill, just to give an idea of the worth of this market, clearly mobile operators have, everybody knows that their revenues are sort of flatlining. This is a new area of interest for them. Can you give us an idea of what kind of earnings might be possible?
Well, that's it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. It obviously depends on the market, but mobile operator data is so flexible. You know, we've spent most of this presentation talking about marketing use cases, but there's other really exciting use cases for this data that are not in the marketing domain, particularly in the area of financial fraud detection. You can imagine with true location information, if you see a transaction coming in a store in Texas, and the user is located in Illinois. These are different regions of the U.S. That's an indicator of financial fraud. So I think we're actually just scraping the surface. The first use case that everyone has looked at are the marketing use cases, but there's a lot more opportunity out there. So to put a number on all this in aggregate is a little tough. But given the scale of, for example, ad fraud, $16 billion in the U.S. this year, given the scale of mobile digital advertising in the United States alone, $70 billion. Mobile operators only need to take a percentage or two of that for it to be an extremely interesting business.
Oliver, have you guys put a number on the possible income that might accrue to operators here?
Yeah. Well, I would generally fully agree with Bill here on this point. There's super huge potential in the market. It was only logical for us as companies in the space to start within advertising because the market is just more technologically ready. And if you think about it, we have started as very nimble yet professional organizations, right? And it made sense in order to show the operators how much value there is in their data to start with advertising, because it typically doesn't, you typically don't get a telco on board within a month or two, right? So you need to have a bit of patience. So it's really helpful that at least the buy side can immediately tap into that opportunity. And then you are able to show after a year already how much potential there is in this business. And the use cases are, well, there are many. Florian is happy to.
Sure. I mean, you can look at the financial use case. We are also obviously here, which is formerly Nokia, here now owned by the German car manufacturers, is one of our investors. They are looking at connected cars. Obviously, that's a future use case. You can also look at the general, you mentioned AI training algorithm topic. So any company actually using AI to better their products or better their customer service is looking for really good training data. So this is really a broad, it's almost an industry-wide phenomenon for everyone who uses data and can apply this to actually make their products or their solutions better.
Okay, well, that mention of AI makes us think about the future and where this could go, and that's a fascinating topic, and I'm sure it's one that we'll come back to. But it's been a very interesting 45 minutes, and I thank our guests, Florian, Oliver, and Bill, very much for joining us. And thank you for tuning in. A reminder that this has been recorded, so if you've got any colleagues that you would like to reference it to, then look out for a link from the MEF shortly. And with that, I'll say thanks very much and have a good week. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.